Today, I have the honor of facilitating what I am sure will be a powerful conversation that brings together two women whose work confronts the deep legacies of colonial violence, racism, gender discrimination, and who also show us path towards resistance, healing, and justice. Because we must look forward. We must see a future that is stronger than our present and that learns from our past. The session is a conversation around inheritance and Afrofeminism, the fights of racialized women. First, we welcome Cannelle Fourdrinier, a legal consultant, public speaker, and Afrofeminist and ecological activist. She is co-director of the documentary, The Ecology of Decolonization, and currently works as advocacy lead at Les Impactrices, where she champions intersectional approaches to justice and sustainability. Joining her is Dr. Sandrine Lemaire, historian, educator, who holds a Ph.D. in history from the European University Institute in Florence. She's a specialist in French colonial history, the history of immigration, and human zoos. Dr. Lemaire is also a prolific contributor to books and exhibitions on these topics and serves as co-director of the ACHAC research group. Together, they will explore the theme of racialized women and the legacies of violence and resistance towards a stronger and future for us all. So without further ado, I welcome Cannelle to start the discussion.
Thank you so much, Stefanie, for this great introduction. Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Les Anneaux de la Mémoire for having me. So let's go. Today, I want to take you on a journey into the invisible yet ongoing consequences of colonialism and slavery in Martinique, which is in the French West Indies. Consequences that still shape the lives and bodies of Afro-descendant and Indian-descendant women working in agriculture. My work is based on several years of field research conducted in Martinique from 2019 to 2024, as well as my active involvement in grassroots movements, especially the collective of agricultural workers and their descendants poisoned by pesticides. For 4 months, I lived alongside Maria-Del, a retired farm worker next to banana plantations. I conducted dozens of interviews with workers, their children and grandchildren. And just as you said, Stefanie, I also co-directed the documentary Décolonized Ecology, which is on YouTube, but only in French for now, and the English version is coming very soon. In France, the history of slavery is rarely analyzed through the lens of gender. Yet colonial violence did not impact women and men the same way because women experienced triple oppression based on race, class, and gender, and they were at the heart of both exploitation and resistance. Today, I'll show you how the plantation system, disguised under new forms, continues to control, exploit, and destroy Afro-descendant and Indian-descendant women's bodies, especially through toxic agriculture. But I also show you how these women stand up, organize, and fight for justice, recognition, and reparations. Here's the path we will follow today. First, we'll look back at history, how slavery shaped the agricultural and social structures of Martinique, especially for women. Then we'll dive into the contemporary exploitation of agricultural workers through toxic pesticides and the ongoing effects of colonial violence. And finally, we'll explore how Afro-descendant women are leading powerful struggles today, for justice, health, and true decolonization. So let's dive into the legacy of slavery. To understand the situation of agricultural women workers in Martinique today, we must first understand the brutal legacy of slavery. Under the French colonial empire, enslaved people were legally considered movable goods, non-humans, according to the Code Noir of 1685. Their bodies were owned, exploited, tortured, killed with full legal and moral approval. While the common image of slavery often focuses on men, in Martinique from the 17th to the 19th century, between 40 and 50% of enslaved people were women. And these women suffered a double alienation. They worked the hardest, most degrading tasks in the fields, and they were also subjected to constant sexual violence. Their bodies were both a labor force and a reproductive resource, as the status of enslaved people was inherited through the mother. Yet, enslaved women were not passive victims. They resisted in multiple ways, by committing acts of sabotage, burning plantations, poisoning their masters, participating in uprisings, and even leading rebellions. And one of the most famous figures of French West Indies is Solitude, a mixed-race woman who fought against the re-establishment of slavery in Guadeloupe and was executed for that in 1802. After the abolition of slavery in 1848, freedom remained a fiction because former enslaved people, now free workers, had no land, no resources, no reparation, and were forced to continue working for their former masters, now employers, under the threat of state-organized forced labor. In addition, the French state compensated the masters for the loss of their slaves to the tune of 126 million gold francs, which today would represent 27 billion euros. To maintain control over the workforce and create competition, the French state imported workers from India, China, and Congo under exploitative conditions similar to slave trade. Indians were considered more docile by the masters and end up making up the bulk of these new servile immigrations. And on the social scale, the descendants of the enslaved and the new Indian workers remained at the very bottom, while the descendants of slave owners, the Béquets, the white Creoles, kept economic and political power. The abolition of slavery, therefore, did not dismantle the colonial system. It simply adapted it into a new form of servitude, anchored in the same dynamics of race, class, and gender oppression. The formal abolition of slavery in 1848 was supposed to bring freedom, but in reality, the plantation system simply reinvented itself, and colonial domination continued through new mechanisms. And one of the most devastating examples of this ongoing exploitation is the agricultural industry, where pesticides become a new tool of oppression. So let's see the contemporary violence, pesticides, and neocolonial exploitation. Although slavery was officially abolished in 1848, colonial domination never truly ended. It simply took new forms, and one of the most devastating examples is the agricultural system in Martinique. Starting in the 1950s, the Béquets, the white Creole elite, expanded banana monocultures. Sorry. To maximize profits, they forced agricultural workers, especially women, to handle massive amounts of toxic pesticides with bare hands, without any protection, and even during pregnancy. These pesticides included some of the most dangerous chemicals in the world, like chlordecone, which is an organochlorine compound recognized as highly toxic, carcinogenic, endocrine disruptor, and persistent in the environment. The Béquets imported it, then produced, sold, and used it in Martinique and Guadeloupe, with the complicity of the French state. And despite early scientific warnings, the French government authorized the use of chlordecone from 1972 until the early 2000s under the pressure of the Béquets. And the result is that today, more than 92% of the population in Martinique and 95% in Guadeloupe are contaminated, even newborn babies, through umbilical cords. And chlordecone pollution is irreversible. And recent studies show that soils will remain contaminated for between 4,000 and 11,000 years. But the scandal goes far beyond environmental destruction. In the banana plantations, women were and still are the first victims. They were responsible for spreading pesticides, carrying heavy banana clusters, each weighing 20 to 30 kilos, often transporting up to 150 clusters per day across rough terrain. They suffered repeated falls, miscarriages, musculoskeletal injuries, and organ prolapse. When they were too sick or injured to walk, their employers forced them to bring their own children to the fields, exposing the next generation to contamination, without exposing the next generation to pesticide without any protection, without paying them. And this must be called modern slavery. In addition to pesticide exposure, women face patriarchal violence within the plantation, sexual harassment, assault, exploitation, and constant threats. And here's the painful truth. This system replicates almost identically the structure of the old colonial plantation economy, where the habitation, the plantation units, includes the workers' quarters and the fields, all in a closed, self-contained system. Even today, many agricultural workers live on or next to the plantations, sometimes without access to electricity or clean water. They grow contaminated food to their own survival on poison lands. And the result is catastrophic, exploiting rates of cancer, cardiovascular diseases, miscarriages, birth defects, neurodegenerative diseases, mental disabilities, a silent, invisible genocide. In 1974, agricultural workers, especially young women, led an historic strike, demanding better wages and an end to pesticide use, calling the chemicals poisons. And the strike was violently repressed by the Béquet and the French state. 2 workers were killed and 11 injured by the police. For decades afterward, fear silenced the victim. But in 2018, thanks to the report of the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry into the use of chlordécone and paraquat in Martinique and Guadeloupe, the truth about the chlordécone scandal exploded into the public space, breaking the long silence. But this report has made invisible the first victims of pesticides, the women farm workers who sprayed them without any protection. And it was in reaction to this invisibilization that former farm workers decided to create the collective of farm workers poisoned by pesticides to redefine the political agenda. Yet even today, the French state refuses to fully recognize the responsibility of colonial structures in this environmental and human disaster. No large-scale decontamination plan exists. No serious reparations have been implemented because of the coloniality of power. And what we face here is not just an ecological crisis, it is a case of environmental racism and neocolonial exploitation. Despite all this violence, despite the silence and denial, the women of Martinique have never stopped fighting. So now let's dive into the heart of their contemporary struggles for recognition, reparations, and dignity. In the aftermath of the chlordécone scandal going public in 2018, a new generation of activism emerged, often led by the very women who had been silenced for decades. Among them, former leaders of the 1974 strike, like Josette Beaumarais and Gisèle Gros, and other activists co-founded.
Sorry, Cannelle, just a quick note that you have 5 minutes remaining, okay?
Okay, I'm at the end, don't worry. They co-founded the collective of agricultural workers and their descendants poisoned by pesticides. Their motto, Debout pour réparation, standing up for reparations, and the collective fights on multiple fronts, for example, demanding the recognition of pesticide-related illnesses as professional diseases, advocating for a complete decontamination of soils and water in Martinique and Guadeloupe, and pushing for an immediate ban on all pesticide use in Martinique's agriculture. Yet the road to justice is full of obstacles, because in 2020, France created a pesticide victims compensation fund, but the criteria are extremely restrictive. Only men with prostate cancer or farm workers with Parkinson's disease or blood cancer can apply, completely excluding the women most exposed. Epidemiological studies conducted by the collective reveal a horrifying reality. Widespread miscarriages, premature births, severe endometriosis, breast, uterine, and thyroid cancers, and devastating birth defects among their children. But because these women were exposed to a cocktail of over 60 pesticides, not just chlordecone, proving direct causality is almost impossible, a convenient loophole for the state to deny responsibility. Worse, the sexist biases inherent in medical research mean that the health of women workers is systematically overlooked while male health issues like prostate cancer are prioritized. The collective attempted to organize an official epidemiological study with local health authorities supported by the Martinique Territorial Collectivity, but the French state blocked the project, fearing the political consequences of exposing the full extent of this systemic poisoning. Time is running out, and every day more women die without recognition and without justice. Their bodies carry the scars of colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy, and yet their resistance continues. Their struggle is not just about ecology. It is about dismantling a colonial, capitalist, and patriarchal system that has never truly ended. In Martinique, the battle of agricultural women workers is not just about the right to clean soil or clean water. It's about the right to exist, to reclaim their humanity, and to rebuild a future free from white supremacy, colonial, and patriarchal violence. The voices of women farm workers, silenced but not silent, are being raised to call for genuine decolonization, social and environmental justice, and the recognition that no sustainable future can be built without tackling the colonial crimes of the past and present. They propose a radically different vision of ecology, one that is feminist, anti-colonial, and deeply rooted in the struggles of the most oppressed, which alone can liberate Martinican society as a whole. Because mainstream history refuses to give Afro-descendant women their rightful place, I decided to devote my research to their plural histories that make history. Thank you for listening.
Okay, very, very powerful. I think everybody has gone deeper into the situation in Martinique and really have a nuanced understanding of past, present, and of course the consideration of future. I would just a quick reminder that you can write your questions for both Cannelle and Sandrine as the session progresses in the chat, and during the question and answer section, we'll have the opportunity to open the floor a bit. So thank you again, Cannelle. Sandrine, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, thanks to all and to the Anneau de la Mémoire and to Cannelle, who has recalled briefly the history of slavery. So, I can switch that. So, I'm not going to deal specifically with women in this short talk, but rather with the broader history of iconography around slavery and its derivatives, right up to its contemporary extension. A history in which women have a special place. So I'll start with a few precautions. The term used as those of the colonial era to put the imaginary into perspective. So colonial iconography produces an imaginary image of the other. It serves to justify the European and French presence. Thus, in the order of colonial mythology, the arrival of Europeans is symbolized, in particular, by the landing of an unexploited land marked by the absence of civilization, barbarism, and slavery. I insist. Iconography emphasized colonization as a means of freeing slaves and bringing the enlightenment of reason, progress, and civilization. So the colonial conquest is thus supported by numerous images that present it as a crusade against slavery and anthropophagy, such as Boisa, the great French, even if he has not a French name, freeing slaves from their shackles or liberation from peoples with bloodthirsty practices. So pre-colonial relations between Africa and the old colonies, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Réunion, and Europe, so West Indies, were marked by the slave trade, which flourished in the 18th century. In France, this triangular trade made the fortunes of cities such as Bordeaux, Nantes, and La Rochelle. And Negroes, I insist with that, were then referred to as ebony wood to reduce them to the status of colonial commodities, on a par with spices and sugar, one of the goods of the great maritime trade. But since the colonization of Algeria in 1830 and the second abolition of slavery in 1848, a whole system of iconographic representation has established a link between colonization, slavery, Enlightenment philosophy, and Republican values. So this colonial iconography is inseparable from this context in which it was produced, revealing the mentalities of an era and constituting fundamental historical material. Thus, iconography was aimed almost exclusively at metropolitan France. I insist also in that, and used a variety of channels such as press, travel, literature, posters, postcards, exhibition. And this staging is in line with the emergence of anthropological sciences, which established a racial hierarchy for humanity. So slavery and the principles of the Enlightenment occupy a special place in Western iconography. It attempts to resolve the contradiction between conquest, colonial domination, and the principles of abolition of slavery, the fight against tyranny and freedom. Thus, you can guess that iconography alone becomes a rewriting of history. So colonial conquest and domination are presented as a liberating crusade. These claims arcs back to Pope Urban II, Terra Nullius thesis, which authorized Christian European states to appropriate territories occupied by non-Christians. So the construction and representation of the savage serves to legitimize colonization via recurring codes. You have the dress code, which is thus of prime importance, establishing a hierarchy. For instance, nudity, or the like of it, becomes a simple reference point and marker between civilized on a part and savage on the other part. And in this scale, the nude and barefoot are closer to nature, while the clothed and shod are closer to mastery. The discourse also used the semi-nude, often the Creole or mulatto, omnipresent in images of the West Indies, which is interposed because on the road to progress. I insist, it's the vocabulary of colonization, not mine. And France's representatives is always at the top of the hierarchy, at the center of the image, or taller, for instance, standing alone in front of a group or multitude. This opposition is accentuated by several other codes, such as the opposition between plain and strapped, top and bottom of the image, front and profile, and between the isolated individual and the group. All these codes codes, serve to hierarchize and establish the colonial order. The white colonizer is superior to the colonized, bringing knowledge and freedom. Thus, the stripes that you can see in many images is a symbolic element that characterized, among others, the outcast, the excluded, and inferior categories. It stigmatized the other, the one who is shown to be different and excluded or inferiorized. These stripes are common in iconography depicting slaves. You can see also when you are in prison, for instance, and where they are not fully or semi-dressed, and even the newly freed, which serves to hijack their new social status while retaining certain markers of their former condition. So even then, them are truly identified in images with these stripes. And to win over reluctant public opinion in metropolitan France, supporters of colonization developed the idea of this civilizing mission. Colonial France presents itself as an emancipator. The colonized comes to save populations from tyranny and ignorance. And this civilizing mission is presented as a moral duty, so that many images present the conquest as a, as I said, crusade against slavery and anthropophagy. And anti-slavery, and it's strange, it's quite paradoxal, became a catchword that European powers used to promote colonial expansion. And in the 19th century, many writers, politicians, and soldiers supported the colonization of Algeria in the name of these enlightened principles, namely the fight against slavery organized by the Moors, les Maures. The fight against slavery serves to justify the military expedition of the European powers who competed in the territorial race for colonies. And in this way, the colonial conquest is seen as a victory of freedom over oppression, of enlightenment over darkness. So you can see that colonial imagery reverses the roles, portraying the colonizer as liberator. And the fight against slavery thus justifies colonization in the name of freedom. And it's the figure of the colonizer who liberates the distant lands he takes possession of from slavery. Such in the case with the many depictions of Brazza freeing slaves from their shackles in school textbooks, in advertising vignettes, in books, and we have many images of Brazza doing that. French expansion thus presents itself to the public as a factor of abolition, reminding them that since 1848, the soil of France frees the slaves who touches it. So in imagery, this principle is translated by the allegory of the emancipating virtue of the French flag. So colonial iconography also shows that slaves, exclusively men in these images, who touch the French flag and are freed. The reality, you know, and you know it well, is more complex, as in the case of Gallieni, who took charge of Madagascar and in the wake of abolition reactivated the old corvée, and Cannelle has said many things about that, off to the island sovereigns for public works purposes. And this example reveals a contradiction between abolitionist rhetoric and colonial practice. However, in the imagery, the principle of 1848 is visualized by the emancipatory virtue of the French flag. But the ongoing civilizing mission shifts the image of the savage to that of the good servant. And I have this, it's important. And it's here that women are more numerous in the iconography. In fact, after the abolition of slavery in 1848, the black shifts from the image of the slave to that of the servant. As the policy of assimilation was proclaimed to be working, nuances began to emerge, notably in dress codes, ranging from bare feet and bosoms to full dress. Representation constantly show that the civilizing mission is working, but that the savages of yesteryear have not yet reached the civilized stage, and the European remains their protector and their guide. This is why in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the West Indian is often depicted in striped shorts when he is a slave, and fully clothed if he is a servant. The iconography then features women, former slaves, turned servants. The historical precedence of the Caribbean conquest and the resulting difference in status therefore played a role in representation. From then on, it was the savages' docility and servility that made progress possible, and the savage was domesticated. So the images insist on this docility and servility. Images of the West Indies differ from those of other colonial possessions, which were already on the road to civilization. In this respect, the West Indies are always presented and valorized by propaganda as the perfect illustration of the success of the French civilizing mission. Not quite civilized yet, but they are nonetheless on the right track. So it's their docility, servility that is highlighted by state propaganda. But colonial iconographic production was far from being solely official and state-run, and many private media, such as advertising, served as relays. In advertising imaginary, the West Indian or Reunion Islander appears when reference is made to an exotic product, such as rum, cane sugar, cocoa, bananas, or to the effectiveness of a product such as soap or bleaching detergent. No, in many of these images, the historical social condition of the person is often highlighted, recalling or suggesting the condition of slave or servant. For instance, since the 1880s, one brand labels and posters are featured the Antillais or Antillaises, as in the advertisement for La Negrita rum, with the Antillaises presenting the bottle to the public. And this label has not changed and is one of the France's oldest advertising characters. Certain codes, such as the heroines and striped fabric, reference to slave status, as I said, are recurrent in these advertising images. And a significant proportion of these media remind us that the West Indian, formerly a slave, became a servant, farm laborer, docker, or musicians, and etc. Whether they are slaves or colonized, the way in which natives are viewed draws on the same discourse, uses the same resources, and conveys the same prejudices. And I will end with that idea that these iconic codes I've undoubtedly disseminated stereotypes about these populations, which have even partially integrated them. For instance, in the West Indies, the Chabin and Chabine, I do not know how to translate that in English, are the result of misgeneration and are lighter skinned, for whom it's considered demeaning to marry a darker skinned person. So this shows the power of colonial hierarchies and their integration, and the power of these colonial stereotypes that were diffused by the French and all colonial powers. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That has really set a solid foundation. And I found the two presentations to be very complementary and to fit into each other. The concept of colonial iconography, the use of images, symbols, visual representations comes out throughout this. I want to throw out a question to start for both, really. And it is around the nudity, the concept of nudity in terms of, the colonial legacy and thinking about it again in what it means in contemporary society now and how does that journey reflect. So before I go back to you, Dr. Sandrine Lemaire, I'd like to open with Cannelle perhaps first, and if you have any reflections on this, and then to go back. We're not hearing you. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. First, I had prepared the first question that you asked me in the chat, but could you repeat your question about the nudity?
Okay, so it's an open consideration, and perhaps I will go back to Sandrine first, so that she can, because Sandrine spoke about nudity as one of the symbols, visual representations of enslaved populations that have perpetuated different power dynamics. So I wanted to open that up and to see what does that mean in Martinique, for example, in society now. Do you see remnants of that there? And then to also go back and open that up a little bit more from the theoretical and the construct of what's happening in society now.
Yeah, today we experience nudity through the carnival. I don't know how to say it in English, which happen every February. And the Carnival Martinique is a political expression and a way to contest the racial hierarchy that took place in Martinique, in our society, in our colonial society.
Thank you. And Dr. Lemaire?
Yeah, I think it's important to have in mind that, for instance, for West Indian people, they were not really nude. They were in between, because the nudes were for instance, for the other parts of the colonial era, like in Africa. But they were nude at the beginning, and in West Indies they were semi-nude because they were in the way of the progress. That was the idea of the colonial images and propaganda. Today, I guess that it's important for West Indian people to see how they were presented in iconography, and this was far from the true and reality. Even if in the habitation, I don't know the word in English, in the West Indies, they were dressed like that. But here I spoke about iconography which was not representing the reality, in fact. So when you can see a lot of images with West Indies with stripes, dressed in stripes, it was not the reality. It was only the idea to put them in between the savagery and civilization, but to show that they were all, again, they have to do something better to go to the progress. And these stripes, for instance, served to do that.
And just as Sandrine said, it wasn't reality because according to the Code Noir, which ruled the slavery, the masters had the obligation to give to their enslaved people clothes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, both. So we have some questions here. So a question for Cannelle. What are the perspectives around the recognition problematics on a state level in France? What is the answer of the state and its institution? Is there a broader European perspective?
Yeah, on March 11, 2025, the Paris Administrative Court of Appeal recognized the responsibility of the French state for having illegal authorized the use of chlordecone, for not having taken measures to clean up the pollution in Martinique and Guadeloupe, and for not having protected the population. Plus, the Administrative Court of Appeal also ruled that compensation may be awarded to those who can demonstrate that they are suffering from a loss of anxiety, the fear of developing an illness linked to exposure to chlordecone. But once again, women are excluded from this compensation mechanism, as the link between the illnesses they suffer and chlordecone has not been established because they were exposed to more than 60 pesticides, a cocktail of pesticides. And thanks to the efforts of grassroots movements such as the Collective of Agricultural Farm Workers Poisoned by Pesticides and others, the French government has introduced free blood screening for chlordecone. Small inadequate measures are being taken, but none of them gets to the root of the problem or solves it. There is no European response, as the matter has not yet been referred to the European Court of Human Rights. But at the level of the Council of Europe, the NGO Quimbered, Guadeloupean NGO, the Ligue des Droits de l'Homme and the International Federation for Human Rights have referred the matter to the European Committee of Social Rights, because the European Social Charter, which is the counterpart to the European Convention on Human Rights, does not apply to the overseas French territories, as France has excluded them through a colonial clause. These NGOs referred the matter of chlordecone contamination to the European Committee, but the committee rejected the application of the European Social Charter.
Thank you for clarifying that and for sharing those details. We have a question from Linda, who thanks you, Sandrine, and asks, how was women's sexuality represented?
It's another question. In fact, it's not special. It's not a specific question of West Indies and slavery. It's a question of colonial images, and we have made written a book which is called Sex and Race, and where we studied the images around this sexuality, and you can see the difference between the colonial part and and the colonized. You can see that colonized people were, and it was on images again, they were always, or quite always, nude. Especially in South Africa, in Black Africa, but also in North Africa, and you can have images when in this part of sorry, I I forget my English. The colonized are quite are supposed to be nude, in fact, and they were presented as with very sexual environment area, instead of white people, French people, but also the others, Portuguese, Italians, Belgium, etc. In fact, in that period, in 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, until the middle of the 20th century, the white women are very dressed. It was impossible for them to show a little bit of their skin. So you can see this difference in the images where this regards around colonized people was this sexual environment.
Okay, thank you. And I think there's another question that's so closely related to it, Sandrine, that I will ask you as well, from Lezano. Could you tell us how the pictures built sexist and racist representation? So, and I guess, and it ends with nowadays. So we're bringing it again to the present.
Yeah. In fact, in our books, we tried to show that these images, and we are not talking about 10 and 100 and 1 million images. We are talking about millions of images in Europe, not also in the French era. You have the same thing in Portugal, in Italy and Belgium, Great Britain, and we are trying to show in our books that these millions of images have contaminated the colonial minds, and even if you were not a racist, for instance, when you see these images, for instance, anthropophagy, cannibalism, which was associated with Black people, when you see these images in films, in posters, in exhibitions, because in exhibitions they were supposed to play this role of cannibalism, you keep in mind these images. And for instance, I'm a teacher, and even the young students nowadays have these images in mind, even if the colonization is far from us now. And for us, it's important to try to decolonize our mind, because these images have made a great stereotypes on these people, even if we have societies where you can for instance, my students have the diversity is in my classroom, but they still have these images of cannibalism linked to the Black people. So it's incredible. And the advertisement and the images of the advertisement have made a lot of images on that. And we are trying to show that this colonial iconography is still in progress, in fact. Even if we saw and for the best, we saw less images like that.
So important to speak truth to the reality of the situation so that we can look forward. Thank you. For Cannelle, there was a sense of triumphant coming together to overcome happening in Martinique. And who are the allies? Who are the allies of the women in this cause towards, you know, a stronger future and a stronger reality?
Our MEPs are good allies, actually. Young women activists who are activists are good allies too, because they led struggles against the Béquet in 2020. And yeah, we have a lot of allies, but we must have much more. And white people who consume bananas in Europe have to be the farm workers' allies, because they contribute indirectly to their sufferings.
Thank you so much. Sandrine, how do you see this? How do you, in terms of allyship in this regard, do you have any reflections on that?
It's I think we will go to the dark in fact, because politically it's important now that we can see, for instance, when we have beginning our works 30 years ago, I think it was more simple than today. Because today racism, you can hear people who express racism before you without any sorry, I don't find the word in English.
Any taboo?
Yes, any taboo. Thank you, Mama. And this is for us. It's incredible, because we thought that our work will help some bodies or some people to understand that racism is a construction, and that images are constructed to serve the colonization. But in fact, you can see that the politicians are using a fact, and usually something that happens in the society, murdered, for example, and they are using that, and then you can see the racism, which is immediately getting higher. So it's hard for us, I think, to work on that. We are not desperate, because we are still working on that. But I remember, because we are working with Lilian Thuram, who is Guadeloupean, and he often say that he discovers racism when he arrives in Hexagon, so in metropolitan area, when he had 9 years old. And he says that he discovered it at that age, because before he was not aware on this. And so that's the idea that the racism is a construction, and you can feel it deeply now, I think, even if our society is marked by the diversity and is enriched by the diversity. So we have to have this discourse of enriched by diversity.
Yeah, BIPOC are in a great danger today because of the far right threat, and we lack allies because the white people refuse to give up their privilege, and that's why the far right progress so much nowadays, I think.
It was very interesting. That so I met Cannelle first at the European Parliament, where we were in a much bigger conference on anti-racism. And it was really interesting to see the future perspective of it, you know, from the MEPs and from the allies who were in the room. And there is a very strong political coalition that is still trying to find its footing. And through researchers, through the networks, it appears that it is still a conversation. And so I think it's still, even in your in Cannelle, when you spoke about when the topic of nudity, for example, came up and we saw the carnival, you know, I would want to open up carnival a little bit more to see if this is now something where the strength lies, because people fly in to participate in carnival, people exchange this, and it is a new conceptualization of women empowerment, perhaps. So within something like that, is there room for bringing together coalitions to bring change?
It is difficult to answer this question because if carnival is a way of political expression, these past years, carnival has been kind of depoliticized, depoliticized. Don't know how to say it, and it's yeah, an occasion to partying more than struggle, you know.
And I suppose that opens up the question, Black joy. Is this
Yeah.
not a resistance?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Black joy is a way to resist to oppression, but we need to resist every day, not just by partying, you know.
Of course. Any last words? Anybody else has any questions before we bring this session to a close? Then I would kindly ask Cannelle and Sandrine if you have any last comments that you'd like to leave with our very engaged participants today. That would be welcome.
I just had perhaps the fact that I have written a textbook 10 years ago, a little bit more, I don't remember. And I had pages to write on slavery. And it was interesting because I've written these 2 pages on the resistance of slavery, and it was on a triangular trade, and the editor was attending to the traditional writings on the triangular trade, the history of that, and etc., etc. And I've written something on dances, playing enslaved people playing music, etc. And they said no. We can't have this in the textbook. It's not the right way to present slavery. So I think it might be interesting to know that it was more than 10 years ago, but I think that it's still in mind that we have an official history. It's not really an official history because historians like us are writing something else. And we are numbers on that, but on the textbooks at least you have an official history, and you have to fight against this way to present slavery with the same images and the same codes of whited it down.
Yeah, we have to decolonize science and knowledge. And yeah, and my last word will be that more than ever, we must fight against fascism and security policies that prevent protest, because we need to protest.
Thank you, Cannelle. Thank you, Sandrine.